Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our first the first webinar in our 2024 candidate webinar series. We are going to give folks 2 or 3 minutes to join. And in the meantime, if you want to just drop your name and what town you're in the chat, and if you're running for office, just what office, and maybe something you've learned from the campaign trail so far. Um, the way that this webinar will be formatted is Zach and Michelle will each have about 20 minutes to give an organizational overview and talk about their policy priorities. So Zach, as many of you know, is our executive director here with the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project, and we are very fortunate to have Michelle joining us from the New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility. You will notice that you are all muted. So if you have questions, as Zach and Michelle are presenting, please put them in the chat, and my colleague Michaela and I will be taking those from the chat to ask at the end. So feel free to keep questions going as you have them pop into your head. And we'll get started in just a minute or two. Like I said, Zach and Michelle will each have about 20 minutes, so I think that we will be transitioning to Q&A around 12:45 will be the goal, and wrapping up at about 1 o'clock. And this webinar is being recorded presently. It will be made available on the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project website, along with Zach and Michelle's slide decks. And I will be emailing a link to that around to everybody who registered as well. So you can expect to see that in your inbox and on our website later this afternoon. Let's give folks 1 more minute. All right, Zach, I'm gonna put you in the spotlight and kick it over to you to get started.
Awesome. Thanks, Casey, for getting us set up there. Hi, everyone. My name is Zach Sheehan. I am the Executive Director here at the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project. I really appreciate you all joining this afternoon. Like Casey said, this is being recorded. It will be sent out after. We did a series like this about 2 years ago. I'm very excited to do it again. Just since it's the first one, we'll get a little more kind of background on the series itself. So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We don't engage in elections or support candidates, but we're an issue-based organization. We do some advocacy. And we also just wanted to provide an opportunity for folks running for office to learn more about the issues that us and all of our partner organizations specialize in and have expertise in. And so throughout this series, we'll be presenting at each one and trying to dig into some slightly different aspects at each of them. And then our partner organizations will be kind of telling you more about what they do, who they are, the areas that they focus on, and some policy pieces. And if they do advocacy, some groups do, some groups don't. But all of them are nonpartisan organizations and really just here to provide information, good resources for folks running for office and just for interested people. So with that, so here's the list of all of them. We'll kind of keep sending out reminders. They're all at noon except for the one on Thursday, August 29th, which is at 10. So there's a little flag there with Housing Action. That one's at 10 instead of noon. And so with that, we'll jump in. I'll be going for about 20 minutes. Like Casey said, throw your questions in the chat. We'll gather them throughout the presentation, both myself and Michelle, and then we'll get to as many of them as we can at the end. So thanks for being here, and I'll jump right in. A little bit about the School Funding Fairness Project for those of you that don't know. We've been around for about a little over 4 years, 4.5 years as a formal organization. We're a small nonprofit based here in Concord. The bulk of the work that we do is information sharing, similar to the presentation you're going to see here. are all over the state. So we travel generally between 30 and 45 presentations, many of them in person in libraries, auditoriums, town halls, at school board meetings, really kind of digging into what school funding in New Hampshire is, what the structure is, some of the shortcomings and from our perspective, inequities and unconstitutional elements of that, and then the impacts on both students and taxpayers. This is an issue that affects both groups and really everyone in New Hampshire, kind of regardless of where you are in the state. If you have children currently in schools, not at all, who have left the school system, if you're a homeowner or a renter, a business owner, it really impacts a lot of elements of the way we work and live here in New Hampshire. We do some advocating. We always are following a few bills throughout the legislative session and trying to help folks engage with legislators to kind of give their own perspective. As a school teacher from SAU 16, as a parent from Belmont, how does this impact you, and making sure that legislators can hear directly from those folks as well. So to kick off, I'm going to kind of give a little example of what I mean by inequitable school funding and the impacts on specific communities and schools. So we're just going to run through a comparison of two public high schools in New Hampshire, and these are stats from the most recently available data. Most of that's about a year back. We get these different reports from the New Hampshire Department of Education and the Department of Revenue Administration. And so here's two schools, and these are real schools in New Hampshire. The first one, you can see that there's a pretty big difference between third grade proficiency in math and reading. For the percent of students that graduate from these public high schools, the public high school A, 97%, which is pretty high, and public high school B, a good chunk below that. Almost a full quarter of students are not graduating at that high school. For those kids that decide to take an AP test, this is an optional course you can take, and then you can take an optional test after. In general, if you score a 3 or above, that's what colleges are going to give credit for. And you can see here for the students that decide to take the class and then go that step above and take the test, most of the students in the first public high school are getting that score that can get you college credit, and only about 40% in public high school B. Teacher salaries are also pretty different, almost $80,000 in the first high school, and about $30,000 less, right around $50,000 in the second high school. Median household income is also significantly different, about 2.5 times higher in the first community. We also see that property tax rates. So this is both your local education tax rates. For those of you that are homeowners and you see in your tax bill, you see the local ed and then the state ed tax rate. This is both. So when you combine both of those, that first community, about $8 per thousand. Second community, 1.5 times that, so about $12.50 per thousand. And the result of that on a $350,000 home, as you can see here, much higher tax bill just for that education piece of your tax bill in the second community. And so this is Hanover and Claremont. These are, not that far away, about 30 miles away. They're both up in the Upper Valley part of the state, up near over near Vermont. And there's a lot of differences between these two schools and between the rates taxpayers are paying and the amount of money they're able to afford to pay their teachers. And there's a lot of both immediate effects on the students in these communities and downstream effects for the kind of the wider economic health and growth of the areas in which these students are living and then graduating into. So when I say school funding, I'm talking kind of going back to the state level. What is the actual structure right now? Where's the money coming from for our public schools? This is the revenue for all of our public schools in the 2022-2023 school year. It's about $3.8 billion. It is a significant amount of money. It's also a significant amount of money for the size of the state we have. If you just look at just amount of money that we spend in public schools, amount of students we have, on average, we do invest quite a lot of money in our public school system. We always have, we continue to be, near the top 5 or 10 states in the country for how much money we're investing in our public education and how much we care about investing in that and generally producing results, depending on how you measure it, where we are in the top of the country, right? The challenge here is, where is that money coming from, right? So both can be true. We do invest heavily in public education. There are a lot of good returns. We have a lot of really good public schools in this state, but where that money is coming from is the other side of the coin. So you can see here, about a little under 9% is coming from the federal government. Only about 19% is coming from the state. That amount, that 19%, is the smallest percentage of funding that public schools get from a state in the country by a long shot. So our state invests the smallest share of the total amount into our public education system. And then unsurprisingly, on the flip side, the amount of revenue coming from our property taxes is the largest by a long shot throughout the country. The reason here that we combine, so you'll see property taxes I've listed there on the left is 70.9%, but on the right, it only says 61.4. That's because that swept, that 9.5% piece down in the bottom left-hand corner is a local property tax. I'll dig into that a little bit more at a future webinar where we're talking more specifically about the impact of these property tax rates on folks who might not be able to afford them. But the way that the law is currently structured, the SWEP, which is the statewide education property tax, never goes to the state. It is raised, retained, and kept locally. So it is a local property tax that stays in that community. So you combine those together, about a little over 70% of all of our public education funding is coming from local property taxpayers. Another way to put that is it's about $2.7 billion. That's 70%, that's the property taxes, about $2.7 billion. That is kind of downshifted onto property taxpayers for us to burden and come up with that the state does not take responsibility for. So that green part, the state adequacy aid, where does that amount come from, and how do they determine how much goes to the schools? So we have what's called the adequacy formula. And what this is a formula that looks at, it's kind of on a per pupil basis. So we're tracking money through specific students. This was just updated in the last budget cycle. So for those of you running for office that are elected or re-elected in the fall, the first thing you'll be doing is really diving into the state budget. So that'll really kind of dominate next year's legislative session, starting with the proposal from the governor, and then it heads to the House. A lot of public hearings, input, changes, then it heads to the Senate, same process. And it kind of takes about 6 months throughout the legislative session. So last year in 2023, these numbers were adjusted a little bit. And so what this is the calculated cost of an adequate education. So this is the kind of high level formula that spits out how much money is going to each school district. This was adjusted again last year, and here are the current numbers. So we start with $4,100 for every student in the state. Then for any student that's eligible for free or reduced price lunch, and this is not money for the lunches, it is a marker of poverty. So we use this since the eligibility is at a certain threshold of the federal poverty income level. We use that as kind of an understanding that students that are living in poverty require more resources to achieve and have the same opportunities as their peers. So the state kicks in an additional amount for students that are at that, are eligible for that free and reduced price lunch. We'll dig into more kind of that when we have the webinar with New Hampshire Hunger Solutions, because they work a lot kind of in this area. The next piece is for students receiving special education services. Again, these services are generally additional costs and vary a lot for depending on the student. Some students might be half hour of individualized reading instruction a week. Other students are full-time placements that might be out of the district that can be very expensive to make sure that they're getting access to the appropriate education just like their peers. So again, state recognizes that costs a little bit more, kicks in some additional funding. The last piece is students who are English language learners. English is not their first language. They need additional classes and services to kind of get caught up with their peers. You add that all together, about a little under $6,000 per student in that adequacy formula. So the state's saying, here's how much you need to provide adequate education for your students. But what does it actually cost? So here you can see a number of communities from around the state. The green is how much they actually spent per pupil in the 2022-2023 school year. The orange and blue added together is how much they're getting per pupil. The orange is that adequacy grant, blue is SWEPT. The reason that they're separated out is because the state actually takes credit for that blue piece, even though that's being raised by a local property tax, because of the way SWEPT is structured, it is raised and retained locally. What we can see here is that every community in the entire state, Manchester is not quite the lowest, but they're always right near there. And they still spend, almost 3 times the amount they're getting from the state. And they do get an additional amount because they have a high number of students, at the free and reduced price level, a good number of students receiving special education services. But every community in the entire state, regardless of the size, the political makeup, how much industry there is, urban, rural, no one can spend the amount of money for the public education system that the state says is, here's your adequacy grant in order to provide that adequate education to your students. Now to kind of dig in a few more pieces here on what's the kind of downstream effect of a lot of this, and thinking to transition to Michelle in a few minutes here. What are some additional elements that impact, for example, the number of access to different types of classes that might prepare students for whatever they want to do after they graduate, whether that's go to college, go into the military, just look for a job right out of high school. There's a number of different pathways. And depending on where you live, you might have different options to pursue those different pathways. So when we jump back to this piece here, we're looking at Hanover versus Claremont, but let's dig in a little bit more into some of these options that are available to students in these two districts. Just looking at the raw number of AP classes. So sure, students in Claremont have access to AP classes, but significantly fewer options. And this often has a lot to do with the number of students that sign up and teacher salaries and the ability to retain teachers to teach these classes. Sometimes they're smaller enrollment and they might require just additional staff in general. Also, number of STEM classes available. And this is just looking through the course catalogs, what the offerings are. Hanover offers a good number of classes above and beyond the minimum requirements for the state, and they get to be more and more technical and specialized, which gives students the ability to dig into that a little bit more. That might be that much more attractive to a potential employer, or if they're pursuing an additional degree after high school. Also, just digging into specifically secondary enrollment, post-secondary enrollment rate, you can see here that there's a good, 20% more students from Hanover are enrolling in college. That's not the only metric of success for a high school, but it is a powerful one, and there are a lot of students that pursue that pathway. A few more pieces here. So thinking through kind of in these two areas, Claremont has much higher tax rates, has a lower tax base. They have historically struggled to raise money because we rely so heavily on local property taxes. And the impact is around the state in general. If you make less money, that pressure on your local property taxes is more crushing, right? And this has impacts both for thinking through school, we're just looking at, school resources, but also, thinking ahead to kind of Michelle's piece, where businesses are thinking to locate. If you could move to a community like Claremont, any property taxes, businesses pay property taxes too, and they might be that much higher, 50% higher. And then that school system might be struggling a little more, or might not have the classes available for the potential industry that your business works in. And so what this is showing is income rates, groupings, lowest 20% on the left, top 1% of earners on the right. The dark bar that's the largest bar in each income bracket is property taxes. It shouldn't be too surprising that we've raised most of our money from property taxes here in New Hampshire. But in general, the lower amount of money you make, in general, the higher percent of that is going to property taxes. The driving factor being that it's harder and harder to afford the price of admission, if you will, into a community that has a lot of wealth, that is able to keep their property taxes lower because the homes are becoming less and less affordable. we'll dig into kind of more home prices in general when we talk with Housing Action New Hampshire, because obviously this is not the sole cause of it, but it is definitely a serious compounding factor. And thinking through policy and advocacy as for folks running for office here in the call, a lot of this is, what are the policy decisions that create the chart we're looking at right here? And what are the policy decisions that maybe start to change or shift it so that people that cannot afford to pay more are not? A large policy decision that was made in last year's budget was to eliminate the interest and dividends tax. You'll notice that that's listed here under income taxes. This is from the Institute on Taxation Economic Policy. This is how they group these different taxes. Interest and dividends tax was phased out, and the phase out was accelerated, so it'll be totally gone by next year. And so what will the impact of that be? Again, this is the analysis done by this national group, Institute on Taxation Economic Policy. The impact of that was about $135 million a year that the state will no longer be getting in revenue. The largest benefit from that will be felt by folks making over $300,000 a year. And that is something that when we're talking about how do we change the school funding system, part of that is, well, what have we done to change our current revenue structure? And how would we maybe, reinstate something like that, or look at who's actually paying and what are the impacts there? A few policy pieces, just to look back to this past legislative session that's happened over, starting this past January. There were a number of school funding related bills. There were four large ones that we were following most closely. This top one was related to the Conval lawsuit. We'll dig into that again at a later date, but it would increase base adequacy from that 4,100 to 10,000. The second one would have increased the special education adequacy grant to the actual average amount it costs to educate students that require special education services. HB 1670 was similar, but kind of did a different structure. And HB 1586 was one that kind of came out of the recommendations from the Commission to Study School Funding. Had a number of changes in it and changed funding to more of an outcomes approach as opposed to an incomes-based approach. A number of good options. Some of them fared better than others, but the House passed the first two. They amended them down significantly, passed them through. Interim studied the rest, which effectively means held on to it. And then the Senate held the rest. So they all died. They will have a work session maybe this fall or this summer and fall, but they are effectively dead and will be starting over in the next session. I point this out to say that there were some attempts made, but it has the legislative session and kind of crafting policies at the state level is the only place where we will fundamentally change the way that we fund schools right now. And most attempts that were tried this session were effectively all killed. All right, this is the last slide here, and then we'll be handing it over to, second last slide, we'll hand it over to Michelle. Just to throw out a few possible revenue options. And one thing before I dig into this time bit, I meant to say at the top, we're going to get into a lot of these elements in these webinar series. And some things we might kind of blow through that you're like, wait a second, I had a lot more questions on that. We'll try to answer the few questions, but also use this as an opportunity to get acquainted and introduced to us. And then the Physicists for Social Responsibility, and reach out to us. If you have questions afterwards, we're happy to provide information. We're an open door to anyone that wants to reach out. And so just one more pitch in there to kind of like use this as an opportunity to build a relationship with us and understand that we are a resource also. So a few possible revenue sources for increasing the amount of money coming from the state, with the goal of reducing that burden on property taxpayers. Just a few ideas in here. SWEPT it could be reconfigured to how it was originally intended to be a true statewide tax. Here's kind of few rough revenue estimates here. For example, the Conval lawsuit, which I'm sure many people have heard about. If we were to just pay for that as originally filed, be about a $9 per thousand SWEPT rate. Most communities, if you paired that with a property tax reduction, would see a reduction on their property tax bill. An important piece here when talking about doing a statewide property tax is that a lot of these should and could be paired with policies like a homestead exemption that would help people who are on fixed incomes who maybe have been living in the house for 30 or 40 years and really can't afford the increasing property tax rates. There are policies that can help target relief or tax breaks or other mechanisms to make sure that those folks are able to withstand any kind of changing revenue policies that we move forward with. Interest and dividends tax I talked about briefly, and then the business taxes. And I point this out in part because we're here with this Businesses for Social Responsibility, but also because business taxes are a significant revenue for the state. It's just a fact. And so looking at policies moving forward, business taxes will be on the table. And so I think an important thing that we want to do with these webinars is lay out what the options are, and then what are the pros and cons of each of these. And there are a whole bunch of other revenue sources and options as well. And making sure that as we move forward with them, we're taking into account who can afford to pay, who can't, and where the impacts land. So just as a quick summary here, this issue of school funding hits students and taxpayers. It is getting worse. It's not a stagnant issue. We're talking about $2.7 billion is being downshifted onto local property taxpayers right now. It's unconstitutional, and the solution really does lie solely with state level lawmakers, because that's where the largest policy and shift in funding and revenue is going to be made, that then can kind of relieve tension on the local school boards and taxpayers. So with that, I will hand it over to Michelle.
I'm just going to take 1 second to put Michelle in the spotlight here. And just a reminder to folks, if you have questions, to put them in the chat, and we will get you answers to them at the end after Michelle's presentation. Michelle, you
Great.
can go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Casey and Zach. And I want to thank, I know the majority of you are running for office, and I really want to thank you for stepping up and being involved in a really important role in our state. So we appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk. And as Zach said, we would love to continue the conversation. So if you have ideas, please reach out. But I'm going to start just by giving you a basic overview, of NHBSR if you're not familiar with our organization. So I think the simplest way to talk about NHBSR is to think about us as like a statewide chamber for businesses that are really engaged in sustainability at some level. So to us, that sustainability means not only environmental issues, but also making sure that we have really strong workplace practices, we're good community members and supporting our communities, and we're transparent about how we run our businesses. So we were incorporated in 2000, and as Zach mentioned, we are a nonpartisan organization. We weren't even involved in advocacy probably until like 2015 was when we really started. We really focused on making sure that businesses were doing as much inside their walls as they could to be good community members. But then we realized that it was important to kind of reach out and also make sure that policies at our state level reflected what businesses are trying to achieve internally and support what they're doing. We're an organization of over 250 business members and community stakeholders. Majority are business, but we do invite community stakeholders like our universities and our nonprofits that work with businesses to also be a part of the organization, because having conversations with everyone is the way we come up with the best solutions. We truly believe that New Hampshire as a state is really going to thrive if we can bring together the power of business with the power of our people. Together, we're both going to be sustainable and prosperous. And so that's what we try to focus on. We do a lot of different events for the business community. So most of them have no focus on state policy at all, but they all kind of touch state policy in different ways. So we run a lot of what you would expect. We have a big spring conference. It's the largest sustainable business conference in the state, with over 300 people typically in attendance from a variety of industries. We also try to make it fun. So we have a way for businesses to share simple stories of their sustainability efforts, and a group of independent judges picks the top stories. And we have a slam where they can come, they get 90 seconds to share their story, and then the audience votes on the winners. It's a great way to kind of get people thinking about little things they can also do to kind of move their efforts forward. We are very focused on trying to, elevate leadership, companies that are really doing things well. And so we have sustainability awards. We recognize leaders for the great work that we're doing. And we understand some of that not only because of the conversations we're having, but because our Measure What Matters survey is something that allows us, it's about a 50-question survey. It allows us to gather information about what businesses are doing in the state. It's open to anyone in the state that wants to take it. And it gives a lot of great ideas for how you can advance the work that you're doing. But we base a lot of our awards on that survey as well. We also are really dynamic in terms of our programming. So after the pandemic, there was a really strong bit of feedback at our spring conference that businesses really needed more mental health support. And so we went out to partners like Dartmouth Health and a lot of our private practices to help us develop a program called Bear in Mind, which was mental health awareness. So we kicked off and did things like that. We've also done our Pathways to Prosperity, which is a way to kind of call out some of the issues in our communities. And then we also have workplace challenges. So, we have the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Workplace Innovation Challenge. It started off as being a racial equity challenge in the first year, but it has, moved to a broader challenge where businesses can really understand what they can do to make their workplaces more inclusive for everyone. And then finally, kind of back to advocacy, I'll get to a minute, but we do engage businesses a lot and encourage them to talk to all of you. I mean, many of you are going to be hearing from us if you're elected to office. So I look forward to having your ideas, kind of shared more generally, because we would love to work with you, on ideas that you might have. I wanted to kind of, before I get into the advocacy issues, just give you kind of paint the picture. So we do have a lot of professional services business. We tend to be businesses that are larger than the average New Hampshire business. It was started by a group of large companies, and so we've kind of stayed in that area. We have a lot of manufacturers, both kind of people you would expect for social responsibility, like a Stonyfield and Timberland, but we also have companies like Velcro and Sertronics and a lot, and Hypertherm. I mean, companies that aren't necessarily out in front of everyone all the time as talking about sustainability issues. But we also have sole proprietors, as well. It's a broad range, a mix that we try to represent everyone. And the nonprofits include like the universities, Dartmouth, University of New Hampshire, Southern New Hampshire University. I mean, we try to include them as well, because they're certainly an important element to our success. But so kind of getting back to the, raising the business voice, we realized that we really needed to talk more about the things that were really important to our business community, and how the people in Concord how we could bring those voices to Concord so that there would be more sharing of ideas and a deeper understanding of what affects businesses. So we, on a regular basis, go out to our members and we ask them what the most important issues are. We're still in the process of kind of gathering that information for 2024, but I wanted to kind of share just kind of the highlights of some of the really strong areas that came out to us this year. So at the bottom, sorry, I've got to move my Zoom toolbar to see the numbers, but you can see the first one, which doesn't tell you exactly what it means, but it's workforce stability, workforce and family stability. And 94% of our business respondents said this was either important or very important to their businesses. So that's it. It is a wide scope. It's including everything from making sure that, we've got, the people that we need, but it's also making sure that our families are at a point where they're really thriving. So believe it or not, business understands that when you've got issues at home that you're dealing with, whether it's daycare or it's a housing situation that's overwhelming your budget, it might be a repair to your car. Those kind of things affect people on a daily basis. And when you look at the bottom line for business, it affects productivity. It affects the way how people bring themselves to their work. And so it's very important. Business understands that we need to create an environment both at a community level and within their place of employment. We need to make sure everyone is supported so that we can really have a great state. They're also, even in all of the backlash on DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusion, our businesses are really focused in on making sure that we're doing the things that make everyone feel like they're included, that they understand that their thoughts, their ideas are valued. They still focus in on climate action, and we'll go into all of this on a bit later. But the other thing that is really high up there is that strong public schools are critically important for us, our move to an innovation economy. So I'm just going to hit these one by one with a little bit more information. So, so kind of going back to that business and family economic stability, this is just the feedback that we're getting from our members. 40% are asking for more public policy development to address these challenges. And that's where all of you come in. Working with you, we really want to find the answers that will help our workforce. Our people are, obviously there are things like housing that are a really tough nut to crack because so much is controlled locally, within our planning boards and our zoning boards. But it's really important that we try to speak to the issues with the policies that we create on a statewide basis. These businesses are also looking for increased advocacy opportunities. So they're looking for us to help them figure out how to speak out, to identify, what bills are important to them, and to talk about the risks that are inherent in bills or, various policy opportunities. So we're very aware of, their desire to really speak to the issues that are affecting them. And 47% of our members are interested in building coalitions. So that's not only with other businesses, but it's also with organizations that are working on issues that are important to individual businesses. We also, as I mentioned, still have a very strong focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Back when the divisive concepts language was first brought forward, we reached out and basically said, this doesn't align with any of the work that our businesses are trying to do at this point. It doesn't feel right. And so we spoke out and created a letter sharing opposition to what was then HB 544. Since has become known as the divisive concepts. We actually took out a full page ad in the Union Leader just to let our leaders in Concord know who was speaking out against this. So, it's companies, it's hospitals, it's manufacturers. I'm sure it's very hard to read in blue, but in the small print, but you can go to our website, nhbsr.org / and it's probably easiest to go to HB 544 is a short URL. You can see the listing of all the companies that signed on. Since this ad went out, it went up to 300 a couple of weeks after the ad went up. But companies immediately signed on and said, this is not what we're looking for. And they were very vocal about it. And you can imagine some of these companies have a pretty big hurdle trying to get through upper management to get sign off on these sorts of things. So it's definitely something that businesses don't want to shy away from. They see the value in diversity. They see the value in having different perspectives being brought into their workplaces. That creates more opportunity for innovation. And they're seeing it over and over again. It's a great way to kind of problem solve, to think about things a little bit differently. They're continuing to ask for educational opportunities. It's not falling off. The very first year we offered our first DEI challenge, we didn't promote it. We had 700 people sign up. So it is, and we continue to have over 300 people a year sign up for our diversity DEI training. They definitely still want to talk about advocacy, things like the LGBTQ plus communities, how they're being impacted by legislation. I'm sorry for the typo in the last one, but they're also very engaged in policy development again on this level. So, if this is an area of passion for you, please reach out. We want to tell you what's going on and what businesses are thinking about, and hear your ideas as well. Another area that our businesses are super engaged in is climate action. And I know that can be kind of a trigger for some people, but it is critically important, not only because it saves us money, it's also reducing our risk. It's making us more resilient at businesses. There are a lot of businesses that just seeing the increased severity of the storms that come through, their supply chains are being impacted. There was a time when Hurricane Irene came up through the Upper Valley and just like cut off companies like Hypertherm from some of their supply chains and their employees being able to get to work. So businesses are realizing they need to get ready for the changes, and we as a state need to get ready for it. But one of the big things that comes out is that climate is of critical importance to our young people, the people that we're trying to attract to our state. We do not have enough people for the positions that we have. And as things are changing, we need more and more, not only young professionals with college degrees, but also skills in the trades. All of those are needed, but they're looking and watching what we're doing. And so for us to attract people both from out of state, but also to keep our young people in the state, it's really important for our businesses to speak to that and address it. And so the work that you do for policy to advance, make it easier for businesses to engage in clean energy is really important, because we have to make sure, just as Zach has talked about budgets for education, these businesses are looking at what they can do to really move clean energy forward. And there are a lot of our members that have businesses in multiple states, and they find the support in neighboring states for whatever kind of renewable energy installation they're trying to put in. They're finding the support there, and so that's where they're moving their clean energy dollars to, or to projects that make sense for them financially. So just want to emphasize the bottom line business impact of these policies in the state. And then most importantly, a lot of people are kind of surprised that business is so engaged in strong public education. But as I mentioned earlier, we are moving to an innovation economy. So it is really important that we have people who are ready to be on manufacturing lines and control, these very sophisticated pieces of equipment. There are a lot of different opportunities from, like I said, the tech programs to all the way to higher education. But the critical factor in all of those to the success of our residents is making sure that they have a strong foundation for their education. And when 70% of our students aren't getting the quality or the fairly funded schools that they need, that impacts us as businesses in the long run. And we understand that's hitting our bottom line over and over again. What I wanted to point out, we were really lucky this year to have a fellow from the University of New Hampshire that is getting her advanced degree. She is actually getting her doctorate in education policy, and she did work for us, research work. So we ended up polling the business community on what they thought about different elements of education. And I was really pleasantly surprised. We had over 60% of our 50 respondents were C-suite leaders, and they were talking about the importance to them throughout the survey of public education. 83% of them believe that the educational inequality that we're seeing, that the Claremont decision and the Conval decision have addressed in the courts, they're saying it is impacting our economy negatively. They're saying it's either 83% say either negatively or strong negative impacts on our economy. They want action on it. They don't want the can kicked down the road. We need to deal with the issues that we have. We need to make sure that all of our schools are funded in a way that allow our students to thrive. 48% of them feel that budget constrained schools are greatly contributing to the skills gap they're seeing when they're taking on jobs. And 96% of them support or strongly support initiatives for equitable school funding. So, you know, it's coming out, and those were leaders from big companies, there were some small companies in it as well, but you know, they're speaking to the issues that we need to address. And so it's really vitally important that we get to work on this and we work together. I know we all have different ideas to bring to the table, but the bottom line is we've got to provide, as a state, more funding to our schools and to make sure that we can address the opportunities that we have in front of us. New Hampshire has the chance to really excel in a lot of exciting new areas. I'm sure you've all read about some of the grants that are coming in to really, move forward some of the regenerative medical manufacturing opportunities. There are tons of opportunities like that we can continue to expand upon. We just want to make sure that we're giving our kids the opportunity to be those employees in those high-paying jobs of the future. And so we want to make sure that they've got the educational opportunities that will allow them to do that. So I hope I haven't taken up too much time, but love to talk with you all about your ideas and your questions.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to, oh, perfect. All right. I think I've got you and Zach both in the spotlight here. So we're going to move into Q&A for the remainder of our time here. Our first question I'm going to give to you, Michelle. Have you seen career technical education programs lead to students who are better equipped to enter the workforce after high school? And um, how else can schools support their students to pursue career pathways?
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of really good programs, and I want to give a shout out to the Charitable Foundation. I know they've been working with both schools and industry to really develop some great new programs in terms of technical education. So definitely that is a huge opportunity. I think it really opens the eyes of students. One of the other things I think schools can do is like reach out earlier. There are so many opportunities just to kind of get kids thinking about what all they might be able to do. So, start to think about, bringing in just people talking about, the careers, the opportunities out there, like in middle school, or I know like Hypertherm even goes down to like the elementary school level, just to encourage kids to stay engaged in math and science, that it's really a strong foundation for the future. And there are there are numerous other members of ours that are reaching out and doing things with the schools in their communities, trying to encourage kids to stay, even if it might be tough for them. It creates opportunities. So definitely, like, you don't even have to think about just technical programs for high school students. Going even earlier is a great way to get people to think beyond what they know. They may just be looking at what their parents are doing, and so they might be limited by that. I think kids kind of follow what they see, and so giving them a broader lens to look through is a really, I think, valuable opportunity.
And Michelle, how does New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility engage businesses in advocacy?
Sure. So we try to make it simple. We are expanding our advocacy this year, so we're going to be doing a lot more work to make it simpler. But in the past, we've done a couple of things. Like I mentioned, going to our website. If you just go to our website and click on advocacy, you can see some of the early work that we've done. So some of it is, just kind of writing, a letter of, either opportunity or opposition to something that's happening. It's easier for businesses to speak out when it's just like all of us. Like it's easier to raise your hand when you know other people are doing the same. So you're kind of, it's the choir approach. Like you feel more comfortable being one voice among many. And so we do a lot of that just to let let the representatives and senators in Concord know that there's a business community behind them. And so we do a lot of that. We do a lot of educational programs just on the issues themselves so that people, if a business leader understands the issue more fully. Sometimes it's, like say with school fair funding, people may not understand, what SWEPT really means or, that sort of thing. So they don't always feel comfortable going to testify regarding bills. So we try to provide the educational opportunities for them so that they feel more confident in what they're doing. Not that we're trying to point them to one view or another, but we're just trying to provide the facts around an issue. And then we're going to be expanding and doing a lot more fact sheets on the issues that we feel are important for business leaders. And so that's going to kind of be going through and just explaining, who put this bill forward, what does the bill mean, what might the risk be to a business, and what the opportunities are, so that they at least understand the actual context of a bill. We're hoping to get more into the policy development side so that, that's why I'm so excited to talk to all of you guys. I hope that you'll come forward and kind of share your thoughts for bills. We certainly would love to be able to work together collaboratively from the start to make sure that we get some bills that, move important issues forward. And the issues I spoke to are not even all the issues that we work on. It's just, I was kind of trying to paint the picture of the things that came out really strongly as important. So we do a number of different things, just to try help businesses understand. I would say the one thing that is challenging for us is that for businesses sometimes to come down and testify in Concord can be really hard. I know even my driving to Concord, it's an hour each way. You get there and you're sitting there, sometimes, if there are multiple bills being heard, like it's really hard for a business leader to come down. So if you're getting a letter, understand that that person really wants to share their opinion. They just unfortunately can't spend necessarily half a day, driving down to be a part of testimony. So that's something I just want to mention. I know there's more online opportunities, but we had so much more engagement during the pandemic when business leaders could be on Zoom meetings like this and kind of just wait until their opportunity. It allowed them to keep working, while they were waiting to testify. And, I hope someday that there's, not that I love being in Concord and seeing people's reaction, but it is just another way to get more engagement from a broader community.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Zach, could you talk a little bit about the school building aid bills?
Yeah, sure. So there were a handful of bills. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but there are a handful of bills this past year that were proposed by Democrats and Republicans to increase the amount of funding that goes through the school building aid program. Very high level, and I can answer more questions about this offline if folks have more follow-up. But there was a moratorium on school building aid for about 10 years that ended just a few years ago. And really what the current process is there's a cap on how much money the state will put in towards projects for school building aid. And these are oftentimes, pretty massive projects. Schools are not cheap. They're large infrastructure projects. And so a number of districts, either didn't do projects or did small projects during the moratorium, kind of bonded them over a long time. And so there are a few bills to try to just increase the investment level from the state in school building. We have a lot of old school buildings in the state. We have a lot that either have tested positive or, there's concerns about asbestos and lead, there's literal infrastructure problems, heating, cooling, all of the above. So there are a few bills last year that would have, instead of we have a cap of about $50 million that will be spent on building aid, there are a few bills that flipped that and had that be the floor. So we'd spend at least $50 million and up to, I think one bill is up to $100 million in a year. And then just trying to allocate more of that funding so more projects would be approved. 17 or 19 projects were approved this past year, but there's only enough money to fund 3. To give you an idea of kind of how little support there is from the state. All of those bills did not make it forward. Again, citing, and I'll kind of, give a nod to one of the questions or comments in the chat. Oftentimes the school building aid bills this past year, the other education funding bills I mentioned that did not move forward, increasing investments for special education, services, school meal and universal meal related bills that were killed this past year. All of them in general, the rationale given was that we just don't have the money available to kind of do all of these things. Someone referenced, childcare, housing, healthcare, etc. And on one hand, that argument is being made to that front. And the other hand, we're cutting revenue sources like the interest and dividends tax, which, as I pointed out, I'm happy to kind of provide more information on that. In general, the largest benefit for the cutting of that tax is going to people making above $300,000 a year who have significant wealth invested and is earning money off those interest and dividends. So that was kind of a long answer to just the building aid piece, but those elements that were not funded for these kind of critical infrastructure projects, some districts have buildings literally falling down or having to be closed, like Rochester last year. And yet we're not kind of investing in those, and we are cutting revenues to the state. And so those are policy decisions that folks, if you're elected, will be making next year as well.
Great. And so for our kind of last question here, Zach, does the federal government provide any funding to the state for education? And then also, could you talk a little bit about what specifically the legislature's role is in correcting the school funding issue?
Sure. So the federal government provides about 9% of funding through a number of different avenues. So it is some, it's not a lot. I guess that's the short answer to that. And again, we started with that pie chart at the beginning that shows that breakdown. We can send some additional follow-up information there. And then the role of the legislature in addressing this, I mean, the adequacy formula, how much money is in the budget, what pieces are increased, whether it's more money for school lunches or special education services or just per people in general or building aid. Those are all laws and policies that are debated and changed or not every year. Generally they're heavier in the budget year. But I guess I'll kind of wrap up by saying that similar to Michelle, like we are always open to help people either craft policy proposals or do research on previous years, like, what were the school funding bills that were proposed in the past 5 years and kind of, where did they go? What are some suggestions around, like good policy around what those would look like? Because at the end of the day, that adequacy formula I showed you, that could be increased. It could be decreased. We obviously wouldn't advocate for that, but the role of the legislature is central to all of this because school boards can make some decisions, right? But they are playing with a very limited amount of funding to begin with, and they're trying to balance the needs and ability of their local property taxpayers to support increased revenue and their local businesses. And so really it is the state level policymakers that really need to look hard at how we're raising money, who's paying right now, right? And who can afford to either not pay anymore or pay more. And those are the policies that are all crafted at the state level So I guess the short answer really is it is all at the state level where these policies will be made to start to address some of these kind of like really large statewide issues.
Great. All right. Well, we are at 1 o'clock. Zach and Michelle, if you each would like to just say a couple words for what you want folks to leave with and let everyone know how to contact you if they want to get more involved or have any questions, that would be great. Michelle, if you want to go ahead and go first, and then Zach, you can close us out.
Sure. Well, I invite you to reach out to us if you have any thoughts or concerns that you'd like to discuss. We're happy to always talk about that. Definitely very open to your ideas. So, and I don't know, Casey, I had a PDF with my email address, but I am the person that I'm actually moving out of the executive director role and into an advocacy manager role for New Hampshire Businesses for Social Responsibility. So I will be the person that you're speaking to if you have any ideas. And you know, if you're lucky enough to be elected to your seat, I'll be seeing you in Concord. So please keep in touch and, you know, share your thoughts.
Yes, likewise, really appreciate everyone coming today. We'll be sending around the recording. We'll have our contact info, the slides, all of that live on our website as well. Really hope you're able to attend more of these in the future and give us feedback. If there's a lot of feedback for things that we or Michelle didn't dig into, we can always get more information out to you all. And in general, just please look at us as a resource. And we'll do our best to provide the information we have, or we don't have the information, we can probably connect you with folks that do in our respective areas. So thank you all so much for coming, and hope to see you on some of the future ones.